Thank you for joining us here at Miami Downtown. I am Jeannie Weeks, Community Outreach Liaison for the Office of the Butler County Prosecutor, and I would like to welcome you to the second of our Butler County Crimes Against the Elderly Task Force presentations. Last week, we introduced our task force to you and explained why law enforcement agencies, elderly services, and the business community have all come together to help protect our senior citizens and increase awareness of the crimes that victimize them. Today's presentation will focus on one specific issue: elder abuse and neglect. Most people think domestic violence as the physical abuse of one spouse against another. With the help of Charlotte Miller, whose father was physically abused by his own grandson until he finally succumbed to the injuries from one severe attack, and Detective Brian Robinson from Hamilton Police Department, who helped investigate Mr. Smith's death, you will see how domestic violence can also affect our elders, who too often feel they have no choice but to endure the attacks. You will also hear from Vicki Cole, victim's advocate for the Butler County Prosecutor's Office, to tell you what an advocate is and what role they play in the lives of victims. But not all situations require law enforcement intervention. Often, our elderly population just need guidance or assistance and may not be sure where to find it. Kevin Kerpisky from Adult Protective Services will offer ideas on what services are available here in Butler County and what you can expect when you contact one of those agencies. And finally, Butler County Prosecutor Michael Mosier will share with you his commitment to the task force and his dedication to educating and protecting the senior citizens of Butler County. Brian? I want you to start.
Okay. I am Brian Robinson, detective for the City of Hamilton Police Department. I got to meet, on unfortunate circumstance, I got to meet Charlotte several years ago, about 4.5 years ago. And it was a Saturday. I was called in to investigate an elderly gentleman who had gone into a coma at his residence. His residence was in the City of Hamilton. And when I got called in, found he had already been transported down to the University of Cincinnati. The sad thing about it is the gentleman was had lots of facial injuries that were very obvious facial injuries. Eyes were swelled shut. In situations like this, the sad thing is that this is something that could have been not necessarily prevented, but if it had been brought to the attention of other family members earlier and brought to the attention of the police earlier, this situation probably would not have happened because we could have taken some action against the grandson. As it turned out, over a large number of years, I don't know how long it was that he had lived with them, or off and on over probably a decade or so. And through mental and physical abuse, the grandson had intimidated his grandparents and had taken basically their entire life savings away from them. Everything they had saved up for. They had to sell their house. They had moved into an apartment, I believe, at the time. Everything that they had in their accounts were gone, and they had spent on their grandson because of physical and mental abuse. The case was a very odd case. Hadn't seen anything quite like this one before, but he had basically, in short, the grandson would order the grandparents around. He would place, it seems ridiculous at the time, but I guess to the grandparents, it was just a way of life they had become accustomed to with him, and they were afraid to speak up against him. He took great pride when I spoke with him, the fact that his grandparents took care of him. They paid for his rent, they paid for his vehicle, they paid for the insurance on his vehicle, they paid for his food. He didn't have a job, and his reasoning for not having a job is because he couldn't wake up early enough in the morning to get a job. He told me that he had tried it a couple times, it just really didn't work for him. And he'd place takeout orders with his grandparents. He would call his grandfather and say, "This is what I want to eat tonight." And I'm not talking about going to McDonald's. He would call and say, "I want this type of steak, this type of appetizer, this type of dessert from Outback Steakhouse." and the grandfather would get up, leave the house, go place the order, pick it up, and then deliver it to the grandson on top of that. The grandson is Mr. Feltner, and I use Mr. very loosely in this situation because he had no respect for his grandparents and everything that his grandparents had done for him. I think he had a lot of anger management problems to begin with. And what pushed him over the edge, despite all of this, is he felt that his grandfather didn't take him seriously in a certain situation. And I won't go into all the details of that because there's some family issues, and I don't want to, that's up to Charlotte if she wants to disclose those. But in the short of it, the grandson physically attacked the grandfather multiple times before this, but this time is what ended it. Stomped on him several times. Actually, when I was 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm down at University of Cincinnati Hospital, and there were actually shoe prints that we took pictures of. You could clearly see shoe prints on the top of his head. And according to the doctors, it basically turned his brain into mush. And he had gone into a coma, and a few days later, he had passed away. Right after the attack took place at a outdoor storage unit. He actually had taken the grandfather then and locked him in a storage unit for probably an hour, hour and a half, somewhere in that range, and left, and had gone and gotten something to eat, washed his hands, and come back and opened it up to check on his grandfather. Grandfather was alive, but mind you, he'd also taken the cell phone. This was very well thought out. He had taken the cell phone from his grandfather, so his grandfather could not call for help while he was locked in this storage unit. Came back, made sure his grandfather was awake at the time, picked him up, actually put him back in the vehicle, in his truck, put a blanket underneath him so he wouldn't bleed too badly on the seat. And this is according to what Mr. Feltner even told me. This is in his own words. And made his grandfather drive himself home to his apartment here in Hamilton. Got home, refused to call for help because over the years, what had happened with all the threats and the physical abuse and the mental abuse is that the grandfather was so afraid that if he left, then his wife was going to suffer the wrath from the grandson. And so he was always afraid to report anything with the grandson because the grandson had made threats. If you call the police on me, something's going to happen to grandmother, something's going to happen to you, and you aren't going to like what the end result is. So they were both deathly afraid to call. The grandmother was afraid to call the police. Grandfather was afraid to call the police. So over the years, unfortunately, the grandson bled them dry with all the money. Like I said, mind you, this was on a Saturday. I believe it was 2 days later, maybe 3. Yeah. 2 days later that he passed away. So 2 days at UC, and he passed away. The grandson, like I said, was, for lack of a better term, was proud of what he had done as far as how he had acted, and was proud of his lifestyle, I guess you could say. It was a very sad situation. Had something like this been reported to us earlier on, or even to his family members at first, the family members, I believe, knew there was some type of an abuse that had gone on, whether it be a little bit of mental abuse. They had no idea that it was something like this to this extent. And if the police could have been involved at that time, we could have gotten him out. We could have gotten Adult Protective Services involved, and we could have prevented this tragedy from happening. And indeed, there's very few cases. I won't say very few, but it takes a really special case when you're a detective and you're an investigator, and you see so much that comes across your plate, and as prosecutors see so much comes across their plate. And you have an interest in all of the cases that you work, but there are certain cases that just sort of grab you at the time when they come in, and you just can't stop working on them, and you refuse to let go of it. And this is one of those cases. That night, I believe probably 11 o'clock or so, Charlotte's mother was in the police department speaking to me that night, and the reality, I believe, was starting to set into her that evening what had happened, and she couldn't speak. She was just bawling in tears. And luckily, she had a lot of family members that had come in and supported her, so she could actually finally sit down and tell us what she'd been wanting to tell us all of these years. And it really helped put the case together. Now, you know, we ended up going back out to that storage unit. We found areas inside the storage unit. He had cleaned up the storage unit pretty good, but there was just minute trace evidence in that storage unit where we could tell that that the grandfather had been in there. We found some blood. We could tie DNA to it. Found some blood outside the storage unit, and then following on Monday. The initial interview that we had with Mr. Feltner, we couldn't arrest him at the time. And I think that's something a lot of people would find hard to believe, you know, especially in previous generations. You think, well, somebody did something wrong. I know they did something wrong. Why haven't the police charged him with that? Why haven't they arrested him? Well, you know, there is a process, and again, the prosecutor can speak to that later on, but there's a distinct process that we have to go through to ensure that if we're going to arrest this person isn't going to get back out, and this person is going to go to jail, go to prison for a very, very long time, and we were in that situation. We didn't have the evidence at the time that I spoke to him. He willingly came in and spoke to me that first night, and when he came in, I had nothing to charge him with at that time. We had the good understanding that he was the last person that saw his grandfather before this incident had occurred. But mind you, this incident actually occurred 2 or 3 days before this, and he had spent 2 or 3 days at home and had gone into a coma then. So we were behind the 8 ball to begin with on this, as far as getting evidence. Now we did get enough evidence. I tried everything in the world to get this guy. You hate to say it, but to find something for him to arrest him on, just so we could hold him, so he couldn't get back out and go after the grandmother while we were putting the rest of this evidence together. That was where my big fear was at the time. The family was great. The family, sometimes you'll see families or individuals who are victims of crime actually interfere with the investigation, thinking that they're doing something proper. And it actually hinders us a little bit. It gives a heads up to somebody, the defendant, the suspect. It gives them a heads up as to what we're looking at, if we're even looking at them, what we're looking at them for. Family did an amazing job with that. Family said, we don't want to hurt this investigation. Obviously, we want you to, want him arrested in the most efficient manner, but we want to make sure it's done properly. And they actually had conversations with him. They were able to tape record conversations with him on the next day, I believe on a Sunday. And those conversations were extremely, extremely important to what we ended up, how we were able to charge him. And actually on Monday, Mr. Feltner finally came in, and I had laid so much information on him during the initial interview I had with him. Guilt did set into him between me and then the family. With the discussions that he had with the family, you could tell by the conversations he had with the family that had recorded, it was starting to wear on him a little bit. He was, to an extent, we'll say he was sorry for what he did. I believe it was more because he was sorry that he got caught for it, not because of not the action itself, but just because he got caught. I don't think he never showed any contrition, at least in my presence, to the family. I don't know if he ever did afterwards, but prior to the trial, never showed any contrition to the family whatsoever. So again, it was an extremely, extremely sad situation, but the family helped tremendously with it. I'll let Charlotte talk a little bit if you want. You want me to move over to Charlotte, or you got something else you want me to address?
Does anyone have any questions about the situation that might, that maybe Charlotte could answer as far as what took place? Any questions at all? Okay. I have to say, in this particular case, I became very attached to the family and was there for them. My name is Vicki Cole Martin, and I work in the prosecutor's office as a victim advocate. I've been in the prosecutor's office for 15 years, basically in this position, and I have to say, in 15 years, you think you've heard everything, and there's always something comes along that tops it. But mainly, we do have 5 advocates in our office. We have 2 that handle juvenile cases, and then 3 within the office, primarily 1 who handles victims under 18. And then primarily I handle cases that are anywhere from passing bad checks to murder. And probably the cases, though, that weigh on me the most are cases that involve the elderly. I feel like that when someone has spent their life saving for their golden years, they should be able to enjoy that and not feel threatened by a family member or a caretaker. And a lot of times positions that they're in, they feel vulnerable, or they feel like that's who has to be there to take care of them, and they're kind of maybe embarrassed about telling about abuse that's going on. Primarily, I just want to explain what a victim advocate is. We get called different things. No one knows quite what to title us, but an advocate is a person who provides support and advocacy and information and referral services to those victimized by crime, those suspected of being victims of crimes, or the family members of a crime victim. Many times you'll find advocates within different divisions. Primarily, our advocates cover common pleas court cases, which are felony cases. And our goal is to help victims prevail over the trauma of their victimization by assisting and advocating for their safety, for their healing, and for justice and restitution. I think that speaks volumes because it's been proven that victims heal faster and move on with their lives quicker when they receive assistance and support from trained advocates and have a voice in the judicial system. The advocate provides the support and the resources and referrals, which in situations with elderly, we would refer to Adult Protective Services and agencies such as that. What we try and guarantee to our victims, there's many things that we need to do within the courts, and that's to give them confidentiality. That we guarantee that they be treated with respect and dignity, and we make sure through letters and phone calls on a regular basis that they're aware of the status of their case at all times through the prosecution. We're present at all the hearings when the defendant's present, we're present at all the hearings if the victim chooses to be there. We make sure that they're protected from any intimidation or threats of harm, whether they're in the courtroom or wherever they need to be. We try and promote a reasonable return of their property if stuff's being held in a property room. And we assist them with a victim impact statement, which that is like a letter from the victim to the judge, which helps the judge know how this has impacted them. And there are times when a victim's present for a hearing, we try and make sure that they're comfortable and that they're somewhere where they feel safe. There's a few things that I guess I've noted, and I'll pass this on here soon, but since we do have several elderly who will be listening to this and who are here, things that I've noticed at times that would be helpful. I think sometimes people are preyed on when you may park in a handicap spot, and I think it's good to always be aware and observant of what's going on around you. When you're in the grocery store and purses, a lot of times I've seen it get set right in the grocery cart, turn your back on it, and then it's gone, and you become a victim. When you're approaching your car, have your keys out, be ready to get in. Don't put yourself in a situation where someone could take advantage of you rifling through your purse. So, and those who are listening and who are neighbors, if you have an elderly victim, go to them, check on them. If you're a hairstylist or a barber, use the opportunity to talk to someone and see if you notice an abrasion or a bump or a bruise. There are groups out there called Cut It Out, which is through hair salons that know to contact law enforcement if they see something suspicious. So I would encourage you to call the prosecutor's office, call law enforcement. I do have business cards here that if anyone wants a business card before you leave, and I do appreciate everyone being here, and I'll pass it on to Kevin.
Okay. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you, Vicki, and wanted to thank Jeannie and the prosecutor's office for the opportunity to be here as a part of the task force. I'm hoping to try to educate everybody just a little bit on Adult Protective Services and then a couple other resources here in the county that we have to try and combat abuse and neglect for our vulnerable seniors. So Some of you may be very familiar with Adult Protective Services, others will hardly be familiar at all. APS is delivered at the county level under the Department of Job and Family Services. We are under the authority of the commissioners, so county to county, each Department of Job and Family Services is going to handle their APS services and decide how to deliver those services to the public. The target is going to be the more vulnerable, elderly, those that are not independent, those that require assistance of some sort, or at least if nothing else, they require some type of assistance with their activities of daily living. So the target is the vulnerable elderly, and we handle several different types of cases. Two of the main areas and the focus today are both abuse and neglect. A couple other areas that we also handle are exploitation, financial exploitation of the elderly, and also self-neglect, where a senior has become less capable over time. They've deteriorated, their health has deteriorated, or their capabilities mentally, and leaves them at a disadvantage. And that's another target of our services. So it very much takes a community. I only have so many workers for Butler, regardless of what county it is in Ohio or across the country. There's going to be limited resources at the within the Adult Protective Services. We depend greatly on the other service providers, the prosecutor's office, law enforcement, hospitals, all of their staff, the doctors and the nurses, and everybody that is coming into contact with these elderly folks and supporting them with what their needs are. So it very much takes a coordinated effort. That's why the task force is so important, to try and get all the different entities on the same page so that we can efficiently and most effectively address these issues. So to elaborate a little bit on abuse, of course we heard the story of Mr. Miller. Last week we heard from Mr. Derrickson about an assault that he was the victim of. That's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of abuse, is the physical abuse, hitting, kicking, pushing the person, whatever the actual physical act is. It's a active behavior that the abuser is doing. So an infliction of an actual injury is the first thing that we would tend to look to identify. Some of the other areas of abuse that may not immediately come to mind, unreasonable confinement of a person in their room or another setting. We talked about the storage unit was a very extreme example of that, but we will see other situations of confinement that we'll deal with that are inappropriate. We often see intimidation. We also heard about intimidation in Mr. Miller's story. The threat, whatever the threats were that the grandson was using to manipulate the situation and get the grandparents to give him their money. We see some cruel punishment of people. As an example, I'm caring for my grandmother and she has an accident, and I didn't feel like cleaning up her accident today. So I decide I'm going to withhold her pain medication to try and teach her a lesson that, she's not going to get away with it to have an accident. She should be able to get to the bathroom. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Obviously, none of us want to be in that situation where we, have that happen, and the elderly person does not deserve to be punished or confronted for something that they don't have any control over. The result of these abuse situations, regardless of what level of abuse, if it's verbal, if it's physical, if it's confinement, there is some type of a potential for physical harm or mental anguish to the elderly person. To shift to away from some of the more violent and active incidents like we spoke of earlier, and towards more of a passive mistreatment is what we call neglect. Some examples of that, and basically neglect is when the caregiver is failing to provide to the elderly person their basic needs. And this is going to result in unnecessary harm to the person. Some examples that we see most commonly would be not filling the person's medications, not feeding the person timely, not changing them like I mentioned earlier, not taking them to their medical appointments. We go out on neglect cases all the time, and there's a caregiver present who's expressing that they're the world to this elder. They do everything for them. They are, without them as their caregiver, the elder would be in really a bad situation. You take a little bit of a closer look, and you see that medications are absent. You ask when the person's been to the doctor last, and the caregiver says, I don't know, it was several years ago. These are immediate red flags that this person that's trying to present themselves as being the caring caregiver probably not on top of things the way that they should. So, these situations interrelate, whether it's abuse, neglect, if it's financial exploitation, they all often interrelate with each other, and you see multiple things going on within the same household or within the same family. And again, that's why it takes a coordinated effort by all of the available entities to try and work together to solve the problem. For some of those that are more extreme, some of the abusers and the overt neglectful caregivers that really are indifferent to the loved one and really do not care, we're going to take an aggressive stance with them, and we're going to try and correct the situation as quickly and as comprehensively as we can. For other caregivers, it's more of a lack of education. It's a lack of support. They don't understand how to do the job properly, how to properly change mom, how often mom should be changed, or how often she should be getting her to the doctor or not. For those caregivers, there are some excellent resources out there. I just wanted to quickly talk about those. First, to orient you to the Adult Protective Services number, before I go any further, locally here for Butler County, it is 513-887-4081. And again, we would handle reports in some of the more extreme circumstances. Abuse, neglect, and exploitation are the main areas. As far as resources for caregivers, or if a family member feels that mom or dad or another loved one is in need of services in their home, they don't think it quite rises to the level of Adult Protective Services, but their loved one does need assistance in the home, there's a primary agency that is usually the best starting point. It's called Council on Aging of Southwest Ohio. Their contact numbers are 513-721-1025, and they have an 800 number, 1-800-252-0155. Council on Aging is able to do something called a long-term care consultation, where they can work with the elder or their family to try and identify options for the person to get either services in the home, or if they need a higher level of care like assisted living or nursing home. The target are people that have limited income or resources and have a reasonable need for daily assistance, whether it be in their home or if they need to be in a facility. For those that don't quite meet the criteria of Council on Aging, there is a local county senior services program, the Elderly Services Program, and they're able to help a broader range of seniors in the Butler County area. The threshold is a little bit higher. They allow a broader range of disabilities, and for people with a more substantial income, they have a sliding fee scale. Elderly Services can be contacted at 513-868-9281 or 1-800-215-5305. And I do have materials at the back of the room for those that are here and are interested. And I certainly can answer any questions to the best of my ability about either of those programs, but more specifically about Adult Protective Services, if anybody has any questions. Elderly Services Program is the county levy program. Taxpayers, homeowners in Butler County all pay their property taxes, and this is a levy that helps to support seniors to remain in their homes. It's specifically for in-home services. Some of the more common services would be things like home-delivered meals, Meals on Wheels, medical transportation, personal care assistance, which would be help in the home with bathing, homemaking. They do assistance with errands. It's really a broad spectrum of services to try with the goal of trying to help keep the person in the home. So,
What's the phone number?
and their contact number was 513-868-9281. And those two programs, if there's confusion, it's inevitable because there's two different programs. They connect with each other. They can refer pretty smoothly between the two entities. So if you call and it's identified that your call is better to go to the other agency, they can help direct you to the appropriate place. So, yeah.
My name is Mike Moser, Butler County Prosecuting Attorney, and I want to thank all of my partners in the Elderly Abuse Task Force, as well as the Butler County Commissioners who have made this program possible. But above all, I want to thank you, the listening public, to the message that my partners and I are trying to bring to you to make a difference in Butler County, especially for the elderly with respect to this program. This issue, elderly abuse, will only be solved with a combination of three primary factors. Number one, effective police investigation, and you certainly have that with all of my partners. Secondly, effective prosecution, and we've shown that also. But thirdly, and most importantly, it's the educational component, and that's where you, the public, comes in. It is our belief that if we can educate all 360,000 people in Butler County to the scams that are going on, the abuse, the physical abuse that is going on, that we can put an end to this or make a tremendous difference in the lives of so many people that are being disadvantaged by the horrific scams and abuse that takes place on a daily basis. So once again, as I said, and have said before, forewarned is indeed forearmed. Thank you.
As Mike was talking, and I think Vicki talked about effective prosecution, a lot of people think they watch too much TV sometimes, and we can't expect our prosecutors to work miracles without the cooperation that we have with the law enforcement that goes with the prosecutors. And in order for the law enforcement to be able to get a package to the prosecutors for them to, in order to prosecute, I think Mr. Moser pointed out, we need your cooperation. You need to delineate between the two types of crimes, I think. One is where you're being taken advantage of, and we talked about that down here, where you're being taken advantage of just strictly because of your age, because of you're an elderly person, whether it's whether you physically can't resist, maybe somebody's mental acuity isn't quite up to, is easily to be taken advantage of, let's put it that way. You'll have two types of crime, one where you're taken advantage of just because it's happenstance. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's somebody you won't know that takes advantage of you, that will either assault you, break into your home, talked about taking purses, and we've worked several cases before with the prosecutor's office very successfully, where someone who's in their 20s will take advantage of elderly people when they're out at the grocery store and swiping purses and then using those credit cards. They will mainly target the elderly people, but that's not to say that that's their only person. They don't follow you from your home to where you're at to take advantage of you, to assault you, or to take your purse, or to do whatever. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. So the best thing you can do in those situations, and there's so much that comes, that comes at you at one time with those, but the best thing you can do is, one, is you scream for help when somebody's coming up on you like that. It takes you off guard, but the more people, the attention for more people that you can draw, that means we'll have more witnesses. We have more witnesses that we can get a better description from them, and we have more witnesses that the prosecutors can put up on the stand and point the finger at that person, say that they're the person who attacked them, they're the person who took this from them. But unfortunately, quite often, when something like this happens, you aren't going to have witnesses around. You're going to be by yourself. Observation skills. Don't fight back. Don't ever try to fight back, because it's not going to, the chances are it's not going to work. They're going to overpower you. Younger people, even when, even as a police officer, I've just been attacked, just strict because I'm a police officer trying to stop a crime. And there's many times that I can be overpowered. And I'm trained in those situations, so I would never encourage anybody to try to fight back in a situation like that at all. But the second type of crime is what we've already discussed up here, where it's somebody that is taking advantage of you, mentally, physically, taking your money, draining your money. Find a family member. Hopefully you have a family member that you can actually trust. Charlotte and her whole family, they did a great job in supporting them. If they just would have been notified earlier, if they would have, we could have gotten him out of the house. We could have gotten Adult Protective Services, and this wouldn't have been avoided. So don't ever be embarrassed if something is happening. If you feel like, you have a grandson. I've seen a lot of situations nowadays, unfortunately, with drugs. Drugs cause grandkids to steal from their grandparents in unprecedented levels. Draining bank accounts, stealing their checkbooks, stealing their credit cards. Don't be embarrassed by a situation like that. Get a hold of them. And if you're embarrassed to even just call the police right away, that's what the Elderly Task Force is for. Give them a call, and they can help you out. They can work you through it. And there's sometimes that people just feel like they got snookered. Somebody talked them out of some money. It may not be a criminal charge that we can levy against somebody and put somebody in jail or prison, but call the Elderly Task Force, because they can at least guide you through what you need to be guided through, and they can help you out, and they can help show how you can prevent this in the future, and they're there for the advice.
I just wanted to add one last thing. You have a question?
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
As a physician, if I see a patient and I suspect abuse, what is my legal and moral obligation to report this in view of privileged communication?
Mike, I think you probably would be best to answer that one.
That can present an ethical dilemma. However, under the circumstances, there are means by which that can be done effectively without detriment to the physician-patient relationship. And I would recommend that under those circumstances, I would ask any physician that's faced with that to contact my office.
As long as I'm subpoenaed, I can give you any information, right?
Not necessarily. A subpoena doesn't necessarily give you the privilege to break a privilege. But there are circumstances when you can talk to law enforcement, when you are aware that a crime is being committed or about to be committed. And under those circumstances, the prosecutor's office and law enforcement can help. We're all partners in this, and law enforcement works with me, I work with them, and we also work with the business community and the professional community, such as yourself, Doctor, as well as the social enterprises throughout the county, the folks that are taking care of the elderly on a day-to-day basis. And these are questions that come to them also. We're here to help. We have the answers to those problems. Okay?
The one thing I wanted to mention here is we have our abuse hotline number, 1-888-662-3673. We've given you a lot of information, whether it's an assault where you've been physically attacked by somebody, whether your issue is of a criminal nature or something that you need elderly services to assist with. The biggest thing is you're confused on who to call. And that's why we created this hotline. You call this hotline, it comes into our office. We're a clearinghouse. And we will take your call and filter it out to the proper law enforcement agency or our elderly service agencies, and we will get you the help that you get. We don't want you to have to think, oh my gosh, who do I call? You just call that number and we will get the help that you need. Any other questions? Next week, we will be talking about financial fraud, identity theft, and the scams that affect and target our elderly people. We have a lot of information for you from there. Margot Halcomb from First Financial will be our guest speaker, along with other members of our task force. And the final Tuesday in March, we will be discussing contractor fraud, and hopefully we can give you a lot of information on how you can protect yourself from the contractors who come knocking on your door and they take your money but never replace your roof or your siding. So we hope you can all come out again for the next 2 Tuesdays as we continue to try to get our message out there on how we can help keep our elderly citizens safe. Thank you, everybody.
Where do you play?